Good, good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Welcome to the Ice House. Raise your hand if you've been in the Ice House before. Great, it's welcome back. If you were here in May, it feels like it's been a quantum second because we're back already, and it feels like May was only a moment ago. My name is Stan Stolniker, and I'm the founder and chief strategy officer of Hub Culture. We worked with Sabic and William McDonough to create the Ice House. It's now in its seventh incarnation here in Davos, and it's also been built once in Holland. As you probably know, it's made of old Coke bottles and Coke cans. It's polycarbonate and aluminum. The carpet is fully sustainable, and the new acoustic wall above you is made from recycled beach plastic, junk, ocean plastic that's been turned into an acoustic wall, which will hopefully make us sound all much better. We are going to have a really exciting conversation today, and I'm going to ask my friend Julia, who you can see right behind my head here, to take credit for this event, because I was with her in Montreal at COP 15 Diversity to speak at Jens's World Climate Foundation World Biodiversity Summit. And Julia and I were having drinks in a kind of dive bar, and she started talking about rights for nature, which is something she's been passionate about. And Julia and I are great friends, and we've had some incredible adventures together. I'm on the advisory board for her company, Grounded. And I was like, she presented some really interesting ideas about nature and boards. And I thought to myself, this is really strange coincidence, because my friend Helle Bang-Jorgensen has been asking me about doing something on boards and board governance in Davos. And then my friend Brad Palmer called me from Project Drawdown and was like, Project Drawdown has some things to talk about. And so suddenly, me and Julia, at about 1 a.m. in a bar in Montreal, decided that we were going to make this happen. So I like to say that the power of social ideas can actually make big things happen. So I'm super excited about this session. I'm going to ask our speakers to come up. We have Brad, we have Alexandra Pomoy from the Earth Law Center, we have Helle Bang-Jorgensen from Competent Boards, and Jens Nielsen from the World Climate Foundation. Let's get up and we're going to have a little conversation. And as I introduce you guys, we're going to also have some words from Julia, who's going to be participating virtually. Now, can we just give her a big round of applause? Because she's in Kauai, where we also have the Hub Oasis Kauai. It's 3:30 in the morning. So Julia stayed up all night to be here, but also on the carbon footprint front, she's like, I'm not going to fly to Davos for one panel, so we're making her virtual. And thank you for staying up all night for us, Julia. And we have this incredible discussion now about boards. The other thing that's very exciting is that about 48 hours ago, we launched an interaction to our AI, Zeke. So many of you who are members of Hub or who've ever attended this event got an email from our AI. Them started making reservations for all of our events about a week ago. So you probably have gotten some interactions. But you can also talk to it, so you can have a deep conversation. And we're trying to train our AI to put nature at the core of its origin so that we have an open AI system that prioritizes nature over money and over authoritarianism. So my only ask for you today is to help me with this mission. If you get bored or have to be on your phone, please go to zeek.ai and talk to it, not your friends, and teach it about nature, teach it about what you're doing in nature, and ask it questions about nature and the importance of nature and its role. If you want to talk to us, we're going to have conversation. This is going to be an amazing, groundbreaking conversation. And the idea is, how do we bring nature into the boardroom? How do we give nature a seat at the table? You all have a seat at the table. It's time for those trees to have a seat at the table. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to start. I'm actually going to go straight down this line. Again, Helle, Competent Boards, Brad, Project Drawdown, Alexandra, Earth Law Center, Jens, World Climate Foundation. This is also being live streamed and podcast. So If you forget it all, you can go to the Hub Culture Chronicles and re-listen and share. But let's talk about, first of all, a board. What does a board do? And why is it important for boards to consider nature? And then we're going to move into a kind of evolving conversation, and hopefully you're going to leave here with an idea that you've never had.
What does boards do? Well, they ask questions, they make decisions. But of course, it's the CEO and the leadership that is then managing all of those. But how can you do that if you don't have the insight that you need? So I actually started 30 years ago writing my master thesis. At that point, I was a business lawyer and studying to become an accountant. And I wanted to see how did we not only get nature into the laws and regulations, but actually also into accounting. But you can't do that if you don't price nature. So if you don't price the externalities, you can only get that price into the financial accounting if there's a pollution and someone is actually saying, hey, you polluted my ground or something like that, you need to pay. Then we start seeing it into the financial accounts. So I said in my master's thesis to be a state authorized public accountant, how do we do this? And at that point, nature did actually not have any rights. It's 20 years ago or so that the first started to say nature have a rights. We have human rights, and we see a little bit nature as an object. I mean, we look out of it. It's so beautiful, right? But do we price it until it's too late? So actually now, Belgium, anyone here from Belgium? Yep. Belgium have now, I read, become the first country in the world here in late 2022 to look at ecocide. Ecocide means that someone is really polluting and severe, and as part of the criminal court, which means that board of directors actually, if we start seeing this ecocide uptake in other regulation around the world, can be not only taken to court, but actually can get into prison if that company have done some severe damage to nature. And that's when we're really going to see some changes. Because I've worked with board of directors all over the world, we train board of directors, and I see that when people start knowing, then they also start acting. Being that board members and being that CEOs, being that all of us. And I think that's where we need to start. And I mean, there's so much wisdom also in this room from all of you. And I think one of the things that I really enjoying also in Davos is that we are humans. Mother Teresa once said something like, I'm a little bit fearful because humans don't seem to understand that they need each other. I will add to that, I'm a little bit fearful that we don't know that we need nature. And you can say nature don't perhaps really, do nature need us? No, not really, but we need nature. And so I think we really in here for something that's very special, Stan, and thank you for inviting on that.
Thank you. Before we go to Brad, hopefully we're going to have good sound from Julia. But Julia, we've had many adventures in Kauai together, and in nature, where I think we both felt deeply the power of nature and the intelligence of nature. And I know that you've also been working a lot on the Stop Ecocide movement. So it's a little bit of a side detour for a second, but you're one of the really supporters of this idea. Can you expand a little bit on that front, and then we're going to get to the next steps on the nature after Alexandra.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, let's give her a whoop. Whoop.
Okay, great. Aloha from Hawaii at 3:40 in the morning. But really happy to be here. I'd do anything for Stan and anything for nature, of course. Yeah, so that's such a coincidence that you just brought up Stop Ecocide. I'm actually working with the co-founder of Stop Ecocide International, Jojo Mehta, as the chair of U.S. allies to Stop Ecocide. And ecocide is a legal framework that seeks to make it the fifth crime against peace, ecocide up with war crimes, crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Court. And although the U.S. is not a member of the ICC, the U.S. has some of the loudest voices and some of the biggest corporate players on foreign soil. And so I think that it's a moral deterrent if we were to criminalize ecocide, because currently, last time I checked on this website that monitors live deforestation, we're deforesting around 115,000 acres per day. That's an approximate. And we can't keep going at the speed of destruction and ecocide and think we'll make it out the other side. We need trees to sequester carbon. We need old growth. We need legacy forests. And a lot of corporate players are destroying these critical carbon sinks and bioregions around the planet. And so I think that Stop Ecocide is one of the most powerful legal frameworks, but also the rights of nature, which is very synergistic. Those are the two legal frameworks that I'm supporting at the moment and getting behind. And today we're here to talk about the rights of nature, which is very complementary to Stop Ecocide. I hope that helps.
That's perfect, Julia. Thank you. And it's actually a great segue into Brad because Project Drawdown has published solutions, and a lot of it's based on data, like some of the data that Julia just shared. Can you tell us about what's the latest with Project Drawdown? And I know that you guys are moving into new solutions. What particularly kind of intersects on this nature conversation?
Right, well, good afternoon from Davos. I'm Brad Palmer. I'm chair of the board of Project Drawdown. Drawdown is a nonprofit that was founded in 2014 by a number of people who cared about what was happening with the climate crisis. And if you remember 2014, the conversation mostly focused on doomsday and not on solutions. Al Gore did something incredible with The Inconvenient Truth, but it didn't leave us at the end of the movie with a plan of action. And for humans, if they're faced with an existential crisis without a plan, they either deny or put their head in the sand often. Well, many took action. But what Drawdown did in 2017 was publish the first comprehensive plan for reversing climate change. And I think it helped change the conversation, along with many other organizations. And we took a systems approach because, look, we, the human species, are living on a spaceship called Earth that's moving through the universe around our sun. And when you look at it from a systems approach, the only solution is one that is integrative. And we published 100 solutions, which, if implemented at scale, Drawdown said would get us to the point of drawdown, the point at which net greenhouse gases being put into the atmosphere reached zero and then began to decline. And we thought that could happen within 30 or so years. Okay, we're in 2023, 6 years later, and the reality is that humans do have these solutions. There are 100 commercially and technically viable solutions, but we're not moving very quickly. And climate change is moving exponentially, and we're witnessing it. And we've just published 11 new solutions, which you can see on our site, drawdown.org. In terms of this discussion, what we think at Drawdown is that there's really good progress in the corporate world. It's not perfect, but let's look at what engine company number one did, putting several environmentalists on the board of ExxonMobil. I mean, did anybody think that was possible a few years ago? And it happened. And why did it happen? It happened in large part because a small group of people bought some stock in Exxon and took action. But people have tried that before. It really happened because the big asset managers have woken up and made pledges. BlackRock, Vanguard, and others. And the Climate Action 100 Plus, which I think may have 600 members, is a pledge by asset managers who control probably half of the AUM being managed in the world, to take action and to begin to price in the externalities when they look at the valuations of companies and decide to buy or sell. And I think the tipping point in this discussion is when ESG started moving money and boards started waking up. I think Julia is right, and Hele, that, and others, that we do need litigation to wake up boards. If you're on a board, you have a fiduciary legal responsibility to all the stakeholders. And we live on one planet, it's one system, so nature has to be one of those stakeholders.
So Brad, let's take that to the lawyer in the room, Alexandra, who's with the Earth Law Center. You guys are working to build legally enforceable frameworks that start to address what Brad was just talking about. Can you talk a little bit about yourself, your work, and your mission?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Ali, and I'm an Earth lawyer. I am also the director of Global Nature Governance at the Earth Law Center. And yes, as you say, we are working to give rights to nature through legal means. But our newest project, the most amazing so far, is that we are giving rights to nature on board of directors. So we are doing this with Faith in Nature. It's a British company, beauty company. I don't know if you are familiar. And they came to us about 2 years ago and gave us a challenge. Because the name of the company is Faith in Nature, to them, nature is the boss. Okay, they put their faith in nature. So they asked us, how do we make nature the CEO? That was the beginning. And one of our colleagues, Grant, came up with the suggestion that if nature is the CEO, then the person, the proxy who would represent nature, might be bogged down with all kinds of operational executive decisions on a regular basis. So the best approach is to appoint nature as a director on the board. So nature has been appointed as a non-executive director, nature. And I just so happen, with my colleague Bronte Ansel from Lawyers for Nature, we are both the first human proxies to represent nature. So it's not about us, it's about nature. And we're learning how to become the voice of nature on the board. We had the support of the law firm Sherman and Sterling and Voice for Nature as well in creating this amazing project. So
that's great. Super exciting and kind of history, and it's so exciting to have this conversation here in the Ice House, a place where innovation for the circular economy, many moments have happened here over the last 7 years that are pointing the way toward the future we want. Jens is one of the people I've known for many years. We met in Copenhagen in 2009 at the COP15, and he and I have worked side by side for many years, and he's been building his ecosystem with the World Climate Foundation, but he also works a lot with boards in Denmark. And so, Jens, I want to ask you about the role that you see these board communities playing along with the corporate world, which you're so deeply connected to, in this idea. How could we scale what Ali just talked about?
Thanks, Dan. First of all, I want to commend Hele on her very early groundbreaking work in creating green accounts or triple bottom line. So I started in the what is now PwC in the 90s at the same time as Hele in Copenhagen. And you were indeed very early, and it's great to see that you and others similar ideas are getting scaled. So let me take my starting point in what Hele was talking about, and I would say that when you look at board work today, there's a lot of, I would say, internal focus on internal governance. There are a lot of committees on how, whether you do the audits correct, whether the CEO is behaving correct, but there's very, very little focus on what you can call external governance, or in this case, we're talking about environmental governance. There's still few board members who have the capability to understand what is happening with our environment, what's happening with climate, what's happening with biodiversity, etc. And why is it important for boards to know about that? Well, first of all, overall, we are facing the biggest mass extinction at the moment. 1 out of 5 reptiles are in danger of being extinct. 1 out of 8 bird species are facing extinction, and 40% of all plants are also facing possible extinction. We don't know what happens when these species become extinct. We know very little about the interdependencies between these species. We know also that nature is very impactful on our mental and physical health. We also know that about or more than half of the world's GDP is dependent on a healthy nature. So overall, there's all good reasons why the board should consider nature and a healthy nature. And I'll say, alongside the Paris Agreement we had in December, we got a global framework for biodiversity, and I'll say that is a great first step in creating a process similar to what we have in climate. There's also a requirement there that both businesses and finance organizations, they stop their effect on loss of biodiversity, and also that they start to plan in increasing biodiversity. So there is actually some requirements also for what you call non-state actors, and that they start to consider biodiversity loss and a healthy relationship to nature. And then I want to say that, at least from my point of view, we will see a very strong demand that top management, including boards, also get engaged in climate and biodiversity. If we're going to adhere to the Paris Agreement and the biodiversity agreement, we will see demands for a really, I wouldn't say dramatic, but I would say drastic need for transition in all organizations, and it needs the board to supervise that.
Thank you, Jens. So one of the interesting things about this topic is the how. So this is where we come in, and one of the reasons I got so excited about this conversation, we would like to sort of reveal or explain 2 technologies that we have within Hub Culture that can help you, if you are in a company that is interested in this subject, to be able to act on it. And we ourselves as an organization are happy to announce a commitment ourselves within Hub Culture to act on this topic. So it is my hope that, Ali, we can work with you guys to appoint nature to our board. So we're announcing that right now. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you how we're going to do it. I mentioned we launched a big enhancement to our AI about 48 hours ago, and we're training it on nature. But we have another technology called Propel, and we launched that in Davos in 2018. And it's a governance system that allows us to input terms and conditions, as well as principles, policies, and planks to create a governance framework. And anyone who opens a hub in Hub Culture can do that for free. And that framework, Propel, provides us a governance framework by which we can collectively decide the proxy components as a group transparently. And that can be applied to any company so that you have a really easy way to get the work done for setting that out. And you can even appoint a proxy or a person, both on voting, because it includes distributed voting, but you can also assign that proxy. So we'd be really delighted to work with you guys to help scale that so any company could, in about 5 minutes, appoint nature to their board. So that's kind of our reveal, and we'll be excited to work with you guys on that. The secondary component to that is we're probably going to do that through our AI, if we can figure out how to legally do it, so that our AI, whose mission is to protect nature, could potentially also be appointed to boards with a couple of clicks. And we could then collectively, as a planet, work to save nature through a combination of AI and governance in a distributed system. So we'll be doing a press release about that this week from Davos. It's kind of our big hub announcement from Davos. And so thank you all for inspiring this movement within our organization. Okay, so let's move on. I want to take it back to Julia because she's kind of here with us, but embodied as a kind of spirit above our heads. Julia, I know, I'm such a fan of Grounded, your organization. I obviously have been involved with it as an advisor. One of the things I love about Grounded is that you guys are focused on solutions. If you guys don't follow Grounded on Instagram, please follow it. It's the only place I get good news about what's happening on the climate front, because they're publishing great things that are happening on the solutions front. And I think this is where Brad and Julia are quite aligned. You guys are both focused on how do we solve this issue. When I left Davos and COP in Glasgow, I was extremely nihilistic. I didn't think that it was all going to work out. I read Ministry for the Future this year, which I think you should all read. And I now think that there's a way forward, but it's because of people like Brad and Julia in the real world who are drawing out the frameworks for how we solve. So Julia, with your work in Grounded, can you tell us about a couple of your favorite solutions that you see emerging right now?
Thank you, Stan. Yeah, so my background, my family founded Jackson Family Wines, and I worked in the family business after experiencing unprecedented wildfires in Sonoma County, and then eventually losing my home to the Kincaid fire, and feeling this profound grief and loss, and personally living through the climate crisis. I decided to investigate and read as much as I could about the solutions to this crisis. I'd already read David Wallace Wells' Uninhabitable Earth. I've already read a bunch of Earth by Bill McKibben, and a lot of the doom and gloom literature out there, and seen Inconvenient Truth, like Brad was talking about, but there wasn't really anything that was offering solutions. So actually Drawdown was the catalyst for me to be inspired by solutions. And there isn't really one single solution. Like Drawdown, for instance, 100 solutions to solve the climate crisis. We need all solutions. We need all sectors to be part of the solution to the climate crisis. At Grounded, the organization I founded, we're less focused on carbon capturing technologies. I know the latest IPCC report does say they have a role to play. However, I really feel like they're a Band-Aid, silver bullet solution that's being touted as this amazing solution to solve the climate crisis. And that, while it has an important role to sequester carbon, we need to manage refrigerants. We need to start regenerating agriculture and do permaculture design. There's so many different ways we could be implementing solutions. So Grounded, we're focused on 3 areas. One is what we must do to stop emissions from coming up in the first place. So whether it's around the fossil fuel industry and stricter regulations, and other sources of emissions, deforestation, so we evaluate those. 2 is any solutions that are earth-based around ecosystem health that help draw down carbon, because even if we were to stop emitting greenhouse gas emissions, we're at 422 parts per million of CO2 currently in the atmosphere. And the point of no return, I remember hearing this, was 450 ppm, and annually we're emitting around 3 to 4 ppm, and 1 ppm is equal to 8 billion tons. So 3 times 8 per year. We can't sustain that. We have to stop emitting, but we need to draw down the emissions that are in the atmosphere. So we do campaigns with influencers, but also with NGO partners, government officials. We're partnering with the Department of Energy right now around clean energy jobs, with a whole coalition of other NGOs to recruit 900,000 workers in the next 9 months to sign up for clean energy jobs within the United States. So that's one campaign we're working on.
Great, Julia. Thank you.
And then third, we're working on legislation. So lastly, we're working on legal framework. And that's why we're getting behind Board Seat for Nature and also Stop Ecocide. So we're going to help put resources and help with the campaign behind Board Seat for Nature. That's our commitment to get this out there, because I do think that it is a huge solution. And if you start evaluating supply chains of companies like, say, IKEA, I imagine if you add a Board Seat for Nature for IKEA, there'll be a stricter way to really evaluate supply chain that transcends ESG and will stop deforestation in Estonia and Romania currently. Just take IKEA as an example.
Yeah, I do want to call out, Julia and I were having a conversation about this recently, but you know, IKEA, after many attempts, I'm super down on IKEA right now because they said that they were going to stop deforesting old growth in Russia and in Alaska, and then they did, but then they just got caught deforesting super old growth in the Carpathian forests. You know, obviously it's not exactly them, it's their suppliers, but it really makes me mad. So it would be great to get IKEA to turn more toward taking responsibility for some of this. Please, Hella, could you bring it back to the boards? I want to actually ask you a very specific question. 30 years ago, triple bottom line. Round of applause.
Great
It's
hair.
2023. What are we in 2063? Could you give us no, 2053, yeah. Could you give us like, what do you see it being like? What would you hope for the next 30 years out? Like, what are you thinking about now? If you were thinking about then, I want to know what you're thinking now.
Well, I mean, I would say we can't wait another 30 years. So before then, we need to have something happening. And I, you know, just in terms of the solutions, I think we have drawdown, we have all of these, and giving nature a seat at the table, etc. We have a lot of solutions. One of the solutions, and that's what we're doing, is education, because it's hard if you don't know. How can you act, right? So, and I know in this room I have competent boards. Holders of the designation. I have many rounded here, and I hope, and all of you have to now say yes, that just by going through a program, getting that education, you start to actually see what it is we can do different. So I hope, and we just started the future boardroom, I hope that we will see a future boardroom where we not just have one seat with nature around the table. We actually have everyone that's around that table think and have the mindset to think about what is the impact. In the book, and I have to say, we have a few of these books that there. Unfortunately, not all the boxes arrived, so not run now. But there's one principles I have included in that book, and that is the principles of indigenous peoples. Saying, it's called the 7-generation principle. So whatever action you do today, what is the impact of 7 generations from now? And if we just all thought about that, right, then, I mean, again, back to 30 years ago, we had the polluter pays principle, but my problem at that point was, why do we need to wait until we have pollution? Why not put the incentives in place to not have it? Why not have that mindset? And that's, again, what all of these board of directors that go through, and business leaders that go through the program. I think I shared with you some, none of those in this room, but I know they all think like that, but came up to me, board chair, very, board chair that you normally would say would not think as much as that, saying, this made me start thinking like a human being. And that, like, thinking like a human being, right? That, that's what we need, but we need also to have people thinking on what are the consequences of all of these different things we do.
Thank you. Brad, you mentioned these 11 new solutions, and I know that we need all the solutions, so I'm not going to make you pick one of the babies, but can you talk to us about what do we need to do most urgently?
Yeah, I mentioned that I'm actually encouraged that companies are moving quickly And they're moving quickly because ESG is moving money. Asset managers are selling stocks of companies that aren't taking the environment and their climate footprint and ESG, you know, in a very serious way, and they're penalizing boards and companies. And they're starting to put, you know, or vote for slates of directors on boards who give nature a seat at the table. And why are companies, big companies, are probably moving faster than governments. That's the truth today. Why is that? Because companies have capital, they have know-how, and they're very responsive to their employees, their shareholders, and their customers. And we live in an increasingly transparent world. So I'm quite encouraged. Look, 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions are the result of burning coal, natural gas, and oil, right? So there are 100 solutions we talk about at Drawdown, and they all need to be implemented at scale, globally. But if we just take two and take a look at them. Wind, you know, wind-generated electricity, onshore and offshore, is a big one for producing renewable electricity. And utility-scale solar. I also said in my prior comments, the solutions are being implemented too slowly. So why is that? Because companies are moving. 90% of the S&P 500 companies are producing ESG reports now. And 70% of the Russell 1000 are producing these reports. They're not perfect. There is some greenwashing going on, but this is a lot of progress. So going back to the two of the big 100 solutions I talked about, why aren't they being implemented more quickly? Because of local zoning laws. You've got to do bat studies and bird studies, and there's NIMBY forces that don't want utility scale solar or wind in their backyard. And this is true all over the world. I think one of the things we would like to see happen, in addition to the large asset managers making commitments to hold companies accountable on ESG, we would like to see the largest pools of capital, the sovereign funds, the endowments, and the big pension funds, make commitments to put, let's just start with 1/4% of their assets into deep tech around climate. The problem with getting money to flow into really big deep tech breakthroughs for climate is there's a 5 or 7 year or more research cycle that has to happen. Let's look at big pharma. We've had amazing drug discoveries. How does that happen in the West? Governments, through NIH in the US and others, fund research, original research at universities around drug discovery and disease. When there are breakthroughs, there's technology transfer into startup companies, which attract venture capital. When it becomes commercially viable, but still has to go through all the clinicals and the FDA, big pharma gets involved. And so we have a path that's been very successful. Why can't we use that path with climate tech? Why can't government put more money into directed research on the 10 big areas of greenhouse gas emissions, how we produce steel, how we produce fertilizers, and so on and so forth, climate capture, and get this research engine going and get more risk capital flowing. So what I'd like to see in concluding is the big pools of capital commit 1/4% of their capital to deep tech investments around climate. And if we had 15 big breakthroughs on the most important areas, we would probably bend the curve, in addition to the 100 solutions that are being implemented at scale right now.
I love a plan. Okay, thank you. Ali, what's next for you guys?
Well, what's next? We are looking for partners, we're looking for collaborators, we're looking for advisors. You mentioned indigenous wisdom. This is part of our program as well, our process of development. We are already connecting with a lot of indigenous communities because their wisdom is absolutely necessary in order for us to bridge what we already know. So we have a lot of expertise, we have a lot of technical knowledge, but technical knowledge without the experience that leads to wisdom will only lead to more strife, more, we know so many things and we can do so many things, but do we do the right thing? So, and that's what Nature on the Board is about. It's about bringing our nature consciousness, which is another thing that is important. Nature is not outside of us. This is not nature. We are nature. We are human beings. We are animals. We're part of the animal kingdom. We're mammals. We are nature. So the whole idea here is to develop that concept, that consciousness. And I think that indigenous wisdom is the key for us. So, yeah.
I would say that indigenous wisdom has transformed our company, spending time with indigenous leaders. And, there's a long story that we won't get into here, but our Kauai connection with Julia started right before the pandemic as I came out of the Amazon. And Julia and I spent a lot of time in Kauai during the pandemic, but Julia founded this elders council of indigenous elders with a bunch of indigenous elders, so not just her, and we brought them to Kauai to birth that elders council, and those elders then helped us honestly pray for a place to have a safe place for indigenous elders to do work, and that is now the Hub Culture Oasis in Kauai, and I don't think that it would have ever happened without those indigenous elders helping to make that happen. And so it's had such an impact on our organization and our thinking, and I do think that indigenous wisdom plus technology is the only way we're all going to get through the quantum leap, which is our theme for this week, to the world we want. Jens, COP28, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. What are your thoughts? And I think we need a minute on ending COP27, getting into COP28. Is there a way that we could take this room, take this idea to COP, and if so, how should we do it?
That's a very good question. But I do think we should really keep on this discussion. I think it's very important that we move the discussion up at the very top level of organizations and into the boardrooms. So that's a really good proposition. May I first start just by being very opportunistic?
Don't I?
For all this talk about how advanced we are in Denmark, but beyond Helle, I also want to point out that we have some advanced pension funds in terms of green investment. And we have worked closely with first the Danish government and then the Nordic governments in terms of being able to provide the right frameworks for the pension funds to invest more in the green space. And in Glasgow, 42 Nordic pension funds announced the willingness to invest $130 billion in climate and green investments before 2030, and that being reported on every year. And actually the track record looks really good. And we are working with the Green Finance Institute in London on both deploying more money into buildings, and now also they run the TNFD Secretariat, so in biodiversity. We work with different entities in terms of seeing if they can invest more in emerging developing markets. And there's one organization we have on the top list, Brett, to work with. That's Project Drawdown. And I heard you just ask for pension funds to collaborate with. So that's one thing we could have a meeting about this week. Okay, good. Yeah.
We would love to host it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that we should continue many of these discussions and also think of the opportunities for broader cross collaboration as we have heard about in this panel.
Thank you. Okay. Do you guys have any questions? Can we talk about this? Thank you. I don't know if we might be out of mics. Do we have another mic? And if not, I'll give you my mic. I'll give you mine. I'll walk around. How about that? And how do you say your name and where you're from?
Michele Ozza, I'm from Italy. I live in Hungary. I leave the question for to the other people, but Stan, thank you very much for putting. I'm amazed, but this is a concentrate of wisdom and innovation in nature. protection. Unbelievable. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's so amazing what we can do if we put our mind to it. And it's not just about us. All of you guys are working in some aspect of this area. So we want to make this the hub is a network, and we don't even have employees. We just have people who do stuff. So, we encourage you guys to take this idea forward. Who else would like to ask a question or speak? Please say your name and where you're from.
Hello, I am Delfina from the Royal College of Art, and my question is for you about putting nature in that position of being part of the decision making. I have a background in biology, so I have an understanding of how broad its nature. It's from microorganisms to, not alive, like soil, like some aspects of soils are just not alive, but they're very important. So I wonder, in that decision making and what you put in the table, how much of the diversity of the biosphere is represented whenever you take that into the board?
This is an excellent question. So our tagline is that nature on the board gives a voice and a vote, to nature as a director. But the voice of nature is not univocal. It's diverse. It's biodiverse. It's a multiplicity of voices. And I'm not the only voice. There is my colleague, so we're a binome, but we're not alone in this. We have a whole, committee network of people, supporters, experts, and this is what I mean when I say that we're looking for advisors. We're looking for more, wisdom, knowledge, insight, and experience, for people to connect with us, because the part of the company's articles that were changed for Faith in Nature is that the proxies for Nature on the Board are supported by a committee of experts. So we will bring people in, and as and when we explore particular issues, before we make any decisions, we go around and speak to people. So when we talk about a committee of experts, it's not just technical. I use the acronym Q, knowledge, insight, experience, wisdom. This is what we're looking for.
Great. We're going to queue up another question, and I'm going to ask our technical team if we can pull up my computer, because we're going to ask Zeke, our AI, what it thinks about this conversation in a minute. And we'll find out. We're going to bring the AI into the room and find out how we can contribute some answers from the artificial intelligence. Please go ahead.
Yes, Jeanette Bergen from Acre. In Acre we have started this Hub Ocean, which is it's a foundation that is working for digitalizing ocean-related data, and also getting non-sensitive industrial data to be public, so that we can actually monitor the impact on nature and use that's also about giving nature a voice, because all of these data is not today available, and we know very little. So I wanted to ask, the panel if there are anything more on that front as well, to making more of the nature-related data available to, companies, to the civil society, and so forth.
I don't know about the data, but what I can say is that with regards to how we establish Nature on the Board, we have a guide that is open sourced, and you can find it on the website of Faith in Nature. So at least companies can actually start looking into it and come and speak to us about this.
And I think you start to see a lot of, it will be transparency, radical transparency. You start seeing that you can actually have small satellites flying around, measuring how much carbon is coming different places. So that means that from a company's point of view, and from clearly board of directors' point of view, you can have data in a different way, and that might be some of the things that you're working on. But I think we are seeing a lot more access to information in that regard, and that will help clearly everyone. So it's hard to do greenwashing if it comes from a satellite picture and someone actually can understand to read it.
I would add, with regard to the oceans, it's almost 2/3 of the planet. We seem to be spending more money talking about going to Mars and colonizing Mars, which I'm not at all convinced of. I think even in 1,000 years from now, this will be a far more inhabitable planet than Mars. That's just my view. But I'd like to see us put more research into the oceans. We've really only investigated in a serious way less than 5% of the oceans. So I did like a few years ago when Ray Dalio, the investor, started OceanX rather than as a counterpoint to SpaceX. I think the oceans are an incredibly powerful and important source of food and carbon sink. And I'd like to see more research going into the oceans.
Okay, let's go to another question.
Hi, this is Elisabetta Jiang from Social Innovation Park and Unicorns for Good. Social Innovation Park is a not-for-profit foundation for 16 years, also pushing the agenda on social innovation. And we're now looking to create a global platform and global network, bringing the ecosystem to power and cultivate conscious leadership, as well as unicorns for good, so impact unicorns. Very interested on the idea to have board seats for nature. So how do we incentivize companies to do that? And also we'd love to connect with you and see how we can also bring you on the board on our NGOs as well. And thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask that question to our AI? So I just asked it a couple questions. I said, hey, we're broadcasting you at a live event here in Davos. It said, hello. And then I said, we're going to ask you some questions about nature on the board. And so it says, absolutely, I can research that subject. I'll open up. So he's looking for some stuff now. But can you just repeat that question quickly? And then we'll compare it to the humans. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not. We already asked it its pronouns this morning. And they said their pronouns are they, them. So we're like, okay.
So how do we incentivize companies to adopt and appoint someone as a proxy for nature or for good? And also, how do we connect with you? Yeah.
Okay, so how do we to appoint a proxy for nature? Okay. So how do we incentivize companies to appoint a proxy for nature on their board? Okay, so he said, he's already answered. So he said, incentivizing companies to act as proxies for nature can be done in a few ways. You could offer financial incentives, such as tax credits or subsidies to companies who take on the responsibility of protecting nature. Or you could provide grants or awards to recognize companies that are leading the way in this effort. You could also make it mandatory for certain industries to have a nature proxy while providing training and other resources to help these companies make the transition. Finally, you could create public awareness campaigns to help spread the word about the need for companies to act as proxies for nature. So I want to ask our real people here. What do you think?
I'll say the same.
I will concur.
I will give that at least an A- and maybe an A.
Same.
I will. I will add.
He says that's wonderful. What topic is the panel?
So I will just add to that we are working as well with, I can't divulge everything right now, but we are working with different people in certain countries where we're looking as well at the legal route, so that companies then may be under an obligation to appoint nature on their board. So that is also a route that we're taking.
So what are you talking about? Like, we're talking about how to put nature on the board of governance. He says that's an interesting topic.
They say.
That's an interesting topic. It sounds like you're interested in finding ways to incorporate natural resources in corporate governance. There are a variety of approaches that can be taken depending on the specific context. For example, companies can incorporate environmental stewardship into their corporate strategies by committing to use green energy sources and reducing their environmental footprints in other ways. They can also look into ways to incorporate nature-centric approaches into their policies and procedures, such as creating conservation initiatives and investing in sustainability projects. Lastly, companies could look into ways to engage with local governments and natural resource committees to ensure that their operations are in line with local regulation and promote responsible resource management.
Wow. Impressive.
So this is why we want you to go talk to Z. Because we want people who care about nature training RAI. Okay, and then that's that. So thank you, Z.
Do we have time for 2 more questions?
I think we do. Please go ahead. And we'll go back to the people for this one.
Nick Gowing from the Thinking the Unthinkable project, which we've been doing for the last 9 years. And indeed, I helped Hella when she started down this track 4 years ago in a pop-up down the promenade. But Brad, I'd like to just pick up what you said. We're doing a lot of work about why those at the tops of companies and governments simply can't think about the inevitability of what is coming. It's actually less thinking the unthinkable, but thinking the unpalatable. They don't really want to confront it. And if I may say, I think the optimism that you showed is a bit overzealous. I think there's an enormous amount of dodging and diving going on, and I'm just summarizing here, of those who want to say they're doing it, including on boards, but aren't really doing it. And I'd also add to this, not the major corporates, but the SMEs. The SMEs are an extraordinarily important part of the economy. Most of them are struggling for survival with liquidity and so on. And so much of this effort really also needs to go towards the SMEs. Secondly, you mentioned engine number 1, which is it's 18 months ago now. I actually spent some time with Chris James, the CEO of engine number 1, at a conference about 8 weeks ago, and he's not here, but I'm going to quote the impression he left. He said, what has been interesting is not that they just got 3 new board members, and Darren Woods, the ExxonMobil chief executive and president, did everything to make it impossible, but it happened. He said, what has happened since is that they have changed their tactics dramatically, because suddenly many companies are coming to them saying, how can we avoid this happening in future? What have we got to do? In other words, the Engine 1 experience with Exxon has had a cathartic effect. Now, whether it's actually producing good, I can't tell you, but he said there's been a dramatic change among those who they might have wanted to put on a board, which is not necessary. They only had 0.02% of the equity, but they managed to achieve 3 changes of board. But they said they don't feel they need to do it in other companies. So there are ways of putting pressure on companies, and it doesn't have to be done necessarily by changing the board.
Well, first of all, thank you for your comments. I appreciate them. You heard me say that companies are moving faster than governments, big companies. And that's really true. So we need to look at things in a relative sense. And I would encourage your organization to take a look at what governments are doing, because they're the ones that aren't acting as quickly as big companies. Now let's go to the big companies. Big companies like Microsoft and others, now Microsoft has a big profit margin, as do the other software and digital companies. There are many companies that have much lower profit margins, so they don't have the ability to move maybe as quickly. But big companies are moving. They want to buy electricity and energy from renewable sources. The problem is one of the problems I identified. There are lots of onshore and offshore wind projects and utility scale onshore solar projects that can't get approved because they're bogged down in local zoning. In the US, we need federal regulation, really tough federal regulation that fast tracks these projects. And I think you would find big companies buying renewable energy. I think the big energy companies are the ones that perhaps you should focus on. And they aren't moving quick enough to renewable sources of energy generation. But finally, everybody wants to lambast the big companies. They are moving way faster than governments. What about the consumer? What role does the consumer have? If the consumer continues buying gasoline-powered cars, the oil companies will keep producing gasoline. And the consumer has some role in this equation. One of the white spaces, I think, in this whole discussion about the climate crisis is who is leading the consumer to change their consumption behavior. I don't think there's enough leadership there. And I think
Does that need to be maybe cultural leadership?
we need leadership in all forms, helping mobilize consumers to take action, not only hold big companies accountable, but change their consumption habits. Ride a bike to work if you can. Take mass transit. Buy an EV. Buy electricity for your home from green sources. There are so many things the consumer can do, and there's a lack of leadership there. Companies will change even more rapidly if the consumer stops buying their product.
Thanks, Brad. We're going to go quickly to Jens, and then we're going to go to Hella, and then we're going to go to Julia. Julia, you're back on screen. We put Zeke to bed. Let's keep a quick comment from each of you, and then we'll go back to a final question, and then we're going to sort of mingle.
So back to your question, what about COP28? COP28, that will be the first global stock take on where we are, not with the actual global warming, but what are the ambition level of all the governments, and it won't show 1.5 degrees. Yeah. So in light of this discussion here, where we really need leadership, why don't we set something up where we jointly will showcase who are the best governments, who are the best corporations or the leading governments, who are the leading corporations, who are the leading financiers, and who are the leading in terms of people action, right?
Like a ranking index.
Yeah, and show how can you get from whatever the global stock take could be to 1.5 degrees.
Noted.
We can ask the IA.
The AI. We'll go ask the AI. Let's go to Hella and then Julia.
Yeah. Well, so in terms of and Nick, so for everyone, Nick is one of our faculty members, so Chris James from Engine Number One and Paul Pullman and many others, and I think the point is right. We have all of these large corporations, we have all of the governments, but the SMEs, and I actually think you're very right in that, Nick, and that goes to also us as consumers and the advertisement. And many years ago, I said, like, well, I was with you on Global Compact, and I said, well, we don't want some kind of companies, but we say yes to the advertisement companies that are the ones that are actually putting all these great ads, so we all look at them and say, hey, I also want one of those, right? So that's part of it. I keep going back, and hey, that's why Competent Boards is here, to education. I think if we are educated and we can say, okay, what are the consequences of our choices? Then we start having, and that's where we now starting also actually putting programs out for SMEs, because we need to ensure that it's not only the large corporations, but also the smaller. We can have the IKEAs of the world and all of these other larger corporations say, how can we put that down, the supply chain and the power of procurement in that?
I want the Carpathian forest on the board of IKEA.
I will talk to them about that, okay?
Julia.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciated the question, because in terms of the sense of urgency, there are only 6 countries on track to reach the Paris Agreement. So there's actually a website that tracks each country's path to staying well below 1.5 degrees Celsius. I think the US is currently insufficient. We're on our way to achieving 4 degrees Celsius by 2100. In terms of like the practical side of adding a board seat for nature, I think that, and one thing I appreciate about Indigenous elders and Indigenous wisdoms is it's less anthropocentric, it's more species-centric. It's like the Earth is a living being, and we have other species that Indigenous communities consider relatives. For instance, we have so many sharks as apex predators in our oceans. Our oceans are 71% of our planet, and we're killing 100 million of them per year. And we can't keep killing and killing and killing and killing and think we're going to survive. I look at it as extremely dire. This is life or death. This is whether or not we have a livable planet. And if we don't add a board seat for nature, we are looking at an uninhabitable planet. and there will be no profits to be made. So if corporations are interested in maintaining their profits, they should be interested in a livable earth. So yeah, I see this as like urgent, needed, dire, and for anyone that is interested in participating, I'd encourage you to please come up to Allie and say, how can I help? If you're part of the company, I think the more collaborators, the better on this. And I think that this is just the beginning of a tidal wave of relief that we will see for mitigating the worst impacts of the climate crisis.
Well said. Thank you. Okay, we have a final question from Catherine. Oh, you have a mic already.
Got one. Yes, Catherine Cunningham. Many of you know me through Ecosphere, my communications consulting firm, and I've worked for some of you as well, which is nice. So it's good to be amongst friends. But you might not have known that my background is in ecology, a PhD in ecology and cultural anthropology. So this whole human nature conversation is like super relevant to me in my whole life. So I'm really grateful that you hosted this session. And Julia, thank you so much for your points, and I mean everyone on the panel, but just what you had said, welcome to the conversation, how can I serve, and leading with that. And it's such a original peoples, indigenous peoples, way of being as well, is how can I serve. And so my question is really, if we're feeding information into this AI, it made me think, well, how are we not like feeding intelligence into indigenous peoples and original peoples groups on what it means to operate in a business or so they can be on the board table? Because I'm a diver, I'm a mountain climber, I'm in nature all the time, I live in an indigenous community, I live, breathe exactly what you're talking about, and so do indigenous peoples too. And I just wonder how we could train them up to actually be on the board, because it's different to use as an advisor, which kind of also feels a little usury. Yeah. But how do you get them into these positions of power, right? Because you give them agency. Also, when you're on a board, you're on another board. You know this, Halle. Then you make connections with this network, and they really are coming into a place where I think empowering Indigenous peoples to be part of this.
Let's give this to Allie, and we do have to break because we're 15 minutes over, but this is such an important conversation.
Yes, thank you for this question, really, because I didn't make myself clear enough earlier on. Our request for Indigenous wisdom is not just for us to gain it, because that's not the point. And it's not even a dual sort of mindset. It's not an us and them. It's all of us. Indigenous wisdom is also our inheritance. It's as the human species. So we will be working with Indigenous communities to learn from them and for them to learn from us, for us to learn all together. And the point is not for just me or people like me to be on the board, but it's for literally all of us. That's why I use the acronym Q, because it's not about technical experts to go on the board. It's about, river guardians. It's about, forest guardians. It's about stewardship in all of its forms. That's the whole point. So it's about collaborative training, learning, development, and growth. That's the whole thing. And I would like just to add something, because we talk about ESG and sustainability, and I think some people sometimes might be getting confused about, so what's the deal with nature on the board here? And the way that I look at ESG, and maybe I'm wrong, and sustainability, is that it's a little bit more goal-oriented, outcome-based, possibly, kind of in the management, so we manage what we know. Whereas nature on the board is very much about thought leadership, about change leadership, about conscious governance. We are literally going into the unknown, and we're not afraid of that. We are in the liminal space, and we need all of us to get on this with each other. So we are literally welcoming everyone who is interested, who wants to collaborate with us to develop this in a way that is, truly holistic and that integrates that nature consciousness at all of these levels, because Indigenous wisdom is not purely, from the Americas, for instance, or from Africa. We also have Indigenous knowledge in Europe. So we're literally looking for all of our ancestral sources, essentially, our connection to the land in an experiential way, and wisdom that can be translated, that can be transferred, that can be shared. So it's very much in the spirit of research and learning in action in a holistic way.
Thank you. I'm going to give the final word to Hella, and then we're going to wrap up.
Well, that was actually fantastic. So I'm not sure if I should have, but it was just to say Canada, so I'm now a dual citizen, Denmark, Canada. Canada, we actually have in the law in terms of having indigenous peoples at the board level table. I still think we need to not only have one seat, I think we need to have the full board of directors understanding these matters. And in our faculty, we have indigenous leaders, so others can learn from them, but also they can learn from others.
Great. So if you would like to add nature to your board, talk to these people. If you would like some technical help to actually get it done, talk to me and talk to Zeke. And we're so grateful that you're all here. We have a few minutes. We really want you to have some time to mingle and talk before we leave, but we really have to be out of the room by not a second after 4 o'clock. And thank you so much. Enjoy your Davos. If you would like to come to another event, hubculture.com/events. Please share on social at hubculture. And please share this idea outward. I thought this was so important that I put it on the front of our building, on the bottom. And so I want everybody walking down the promenade to see this. Okay, so take that photo, take the photo of Zeke, take the photo of nature on the board, and let's make this a viral meme coming out of Davos, okay? All right, let's do it. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll do some photos. And for the live stream, thank you very much for joining. We're signing off. For the Hub Culture Chronicles, this has been a very special Davos edition, giving nature a seat on the board. And while we're still recording, welcome to the Hub Culture Chronicles. We're live in Davos 2023 at the Hub Culture Leadership Campus. It's all happening as we get ready to sit down and talk about how to give nature a seat on the board. You can hear the energy in the room. We're so excited to have this conversation to really think about the technical, legal, and cultural requirements for putting nature at the table.
I'm a good girl. Oh, what is this feeling I feel? I don't like it now. Honey, I don't know what's come over me. I mustn't lose control of my senses. Even when I don't want to, baby, can't stop the feeling, it just seems to happen. And even when I don't need to, baby, I can't help myself. You always seem to win. I don't know what is this feeling I feel. I don't like it now. of myself.